and welcome. My name is Sheila and this is Christina. We are mother and daughter. So we are going to be reviewing this novel. It's one of the Crowns of Nyaxia series, and the title is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. Now this novel is a duet, and this is the second text, and we're going to talk about that. It also has a little novella and then a spin-off as well. So it's there's a whole series involved,
and
if you like
more
it.
Coming.
Absolutely. Now, I have just finished reading the novel, and I have to say that of all the novels that I have read to date, it's possibly one of the tightest, well-structured novels that I have read in a little while. So cheers, Christina. We'll take a little cheers as we get started. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about the novel was the fact that there were so many complex and dynamic relationships within it.
Yeah.
So many complex characters that were so well written. The world building and the plot was all woven into that. It wasn't, one of those novels that you have to really, really think about and concentrate on it to try and find out where they're going.
Each character served a purpose as well towards, the main character's own motivations. It didn't feel like there was any character in there just for filler or just for space. They were each their own person, a three-dimensional character, and they fueled the narrative, so.
Now, I know we've had a little chat about this, and I am going to mention, before we get into the, the character development and the antagonist, protagonist, all of that, the names, okay, because as I was reading it, I had a little giggle that, because again it's fantasy genre, and one of the things, obviously they all have quite exotic names. So you have Oriah, who is our heroine, our protagonist. Then you have Rain, who is also a protagonist and
Misha.
the love interest. You have the friendship relationship with Misha and Rain. And then you have Sentinus, who comes from the House of Blood. And then, I'm working my way through all of these exotic names and fantasy. And then we have King of the Vampires. We have Head of the Nightborn. We have Oriah's father. Dun, dun, dun. Wait for his name.
Vincent.
Now, I talk about such... Now, there's nothing wrong. Apologies to any Vincents out there, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with the name Vincent.
Yeah, it was a bit weird in the fantasy world.
In the middle of this fantasy, to give him, and then I began to wonder, in terms of the character Oriah, was that a deliberate ploy, do you think, on Carissa Broadbent's, when she was writing it, to kind of link the link the humanity of Oriah to...
I've never actually thought of that before. That's actually quite inspired.
Insightful. You see, this is not my first time round the rodeo. So just to give him that kind of very human name, and you have this human child, because I was thinking about the dynamic of their relationship.
Yes.
Because when Oriah is first introduced, she's human, but she seems to have a lot of very strong characteristics. She doesn't manifest or display fear living in amongst these human killers, these vampires, bloodsuckers, and all of these things. And it is quite a dark novel, quite a dark concept.
It is, yes.
And then you have the gentleness of Vincent at this, from the start with her.
Yes, he definitely has that sort of loving paternal sort of relationship with her, but I also think he has his own wee twists and stuff. He has his own motivations in the novel too, and he's going to use her to get whatever he wants.
There are so many twists and turns within the novel that it keeps you hooked from the first word on the page right through to the ending. And as I said at the start, been a long time since a modern novel, a contemporary novel, has really grabbed me in such a way.
Yes.
Certainly nothing like the Twilight novels that you and I would have read.
Completely different.
Way back in the day, when we were doing the book club without the Prosecco. It's much more fun nowadays. I'm sure you would agree.
It's completely different.
Better.
Oh, absolutely. I don't feel like you're reading to monitor me.
Okay, that's a whole other podcast. Okay, that you're
Completely
giving away my parenting strategies and techniques. They'd be thinking that I was a monster. There's a touch of the Vincent about me
You had your own
unknowingly.
motivation.
So Araya is our protagonist. She is our female heroine. She's a very strong heroine.
She is, yes.
But one of the things that I really like about this is that there are so many complex relationships that she's the protagonist, but her, I suppose, the romantic aspect to the novel isn't the central driving plot, because you have the dynamic of the the familial relationship between her and Vincent. You have the relationship between her and Alana.
Yep.
You have the struggle of the relationship that she has living as a human in this kind of world of vampires.
Yeah, her own relationship with the actual world. Yeah, I feel like nowadays people would call, any fantasy book with romance, they call it very, very, very inspired again. Romantasy. But I wouldn't describe this as that. I would say it's more like a romantic fantasy, in that the world is the driving force in it, rather than that sort of romantic relationship. Because as you said, like, you've got your platonic friendships, you've got your parental relationships in there, you've got Oraya's own struggle coming to terms, even her relationship with herself, and who she is. There's so many complex and dynamic things that the author's exploring, that the romantic aspect is sort of nearly like a subplot.
But it's seamlessly interwoven
it works
into it. Now, okay, there's a bit of a generation gap between, obviously, you're my daughter, which makes me your mother. And there are going to be certain things that perhaps I'm not looking for in a novel. And I have to say that up until about maybe the last 50 pages of this text, I thought, finally. Do you know what I'm going to say?
I don't know. Is it the ending of it?
No. Well, we're not going to give away any spoilers.
Oh, right, okay.
No, because of the complexity of the relationships and the variety of the relationships in it, I've found it so refreshing that there was no kind of pornographic descriptions of... Why are you making that face? Pornographic descriptions of sex or
the young ones
intercourse. Well,
so we'll just...
young in mind, not in body or age or anything else. And I that's the only thing that I can say I was disappointed with.
It's written for adults.
It is written for adults, but was it really necessary?
Probably not.
No, it wasn't.
But it's written for grown-ups, and you would be surprised.
Well, now, listen, and I'm not a prude by any shape or stretch of the imagination, but it worked so well without it. And even, let's say, for argument's sake, for fairness sake, okay, there is an element, a dynamic, in terms to add that kind of realism. And I know that seems to be a bit of a contradiction or a paradox in the terms of fantasy. But in terms of that romantic relationship, to add that realism into it, it felt like it went on for about 30 pages.
You could probably just skip those.
I did. I was like, I'm
proud of you.
God.
You used your own judgment.
I don't want to listen to anything, I was going to say something there, but I remembered who my audience was, anything like that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I just skipped past it. I really did. Take a big drink of your Prosecco.
I think I need it. I'm not recommending any books to you again.
And that was, this was your recommendation. It really was. So that
would be... Well, don't say it like that.
No, but listen, realistically... I know you read art, and I'm not saying that I'm not saying it doesn't have to be there, but did it need having? It was like she had saved it up the whole way through.
Gratuitous.
Well, definitely.
Yeah. Do you know? I don't want to say what I'm going to say.
Okay,
I know my audience too. I was going to say. No, I'm not going to say.
Yes, you are. Third time's a charm. Come on, knock it out.
The S word sells. That's
Sex.
what. Yes, that's
you can
what
say
people,
it. I can coach you through it. SEX. I'll turn my head this way.
No. Okay, let's move on. That's who I
Vincent.
want to talk about
You want to
today.
talk about Vincent.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about Araya
Yeah.
and how strong of a character she is. Do you find she's a believable character as the text progresses?
I do, only because I don't feel like she made her out to be, you know, like this badass sort of nothing scares me sort of character. I feel like because she was badass, she was pretty cool, but because she did have her own fears, even going into the Kajari and stuff, you know, and her own self-doubts and stuff, and questioned, you know, her self-worth, you know, because of her position in the world. I feel like that's something that everybody can sort of relate to, you know, like we always have these feelings like, you know, am I good enough? Do I fit in here, you know? And I just feel like seeing someone like that, but still seeing them battle their way through, I feel like it was very refreshing. And
I think as well that she really, really covered the fact that she was maybe, you know, without making her other, she really did kind of make her relatable, because there was a wee touch of the outsider. You know, she didn't
Yes.
fit in
Anywhere,
you know,
really.
she was human,
Yeah.
but she couldn't identify with
The
you know, the
humans, yeah.
humanity, because she had been taken from she was a young child to live with Vincent, the king of the vampires, with the most nondescript, ordinary,
Yeah.
you know, very, very nearly distinguished name, you know.
Do you know what? He does stand out. You would think the names like Araya, Ray, and Sentiness, all that would stand out. Vincent.
No, Vincent is memorable.
I don't know. I think
you
we
know.
should start a Vincent fan club.
I
at
do.
this
He
point.
will definitely. He definitely has my vote.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was, but it wasn't like she was making her an outsider. It was so tightly written and so
It was like
seamlessly.
integral to the plot.
But you know, and that's why I say that this is against all odds, even with that kind of slight criticism. And that's just, you know, that I completely own. That's a very personal thing, and other people might really like that. Do you know what I mean? No judgment, no judgment. I just don't find it
It
necessary.
is literally the very, very end. So
Last kind of 30 of the last 50 pages. It felt like, I mean, I was flicking.
the
and I
whole
was like,
book for you.
oh my God, it was like a marathon.
Oh no,
you
it's
know?
over. Oh my God.
Is this ever going to end? You know, so.
And do you know what the thing is? This is how I imagine other people read. I see like a movie in my
Yeah.
head, so I would just love to have been in your head and you going, oh my God, my eyes.
My
poor brain.
my Victorian sensibilities were, you
Oh, you
know,
had to go and
triggered.
put in
I
your
did.
nose
I
and
had to
all
go and get the
after
snuff
that,
box
yeah.
out. But, you know, each to their own. But that's not, do you know, that didn't detract from my enjoyment of the
No.
text or the cleverness or the complexity of it. Because to get all of those things right,
Yeah.
and to make them fit, you know, and there were so many different dynamics there, you know, and so if we move, I suppose, away, we've kind of infused character and
world,
relationships
yeah.
there. But just even to focus a wee bit more on the world building,
Yeah.
what was your take on that? Because there are so many different worlds that she builds there seamlessly.
Do you know, I thought it was refreshing, you know, because your vampire tale is just, you've got a vampire, usually it's set in like a sort of teenage sort of, you know, that upper end of the teenage thing, you know, set in the modern world, you've got your vampires, they sparkle,
Now, that was one thing that just, you know,
they sound like porcelain when they touch each other. This was completely different for me in that, like, it was a whole world dedicated to the vampires, you know, and you still had your humans, but you had your, it wasn't just, there's this group of vampires, there's 3 different groups of vampires. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't even that these vampires just came out of nowhere. They were created by this goddess, you know, that strayed away from the other gods and goddesses in the novel and stuff. And even just, like, it seems overwhelming, but the way she, you know, sort of dribbles in these wee details, you know, you nearly feel like you're becoming part of the world. And I don't know, I just thought it was very...
I just find that every single word counted. There were no words
Yeah.
that were superfluous, and she was able to kind of build all of those worlds and immerse you into them in a way within a paragraph.
Yeah.
That you weren't labouring over pages and
Yeah.
pages, and you didn't have to kind of think, oh my God, I need to flick back to find out where that
Yeah,
went.
I think
because
that's
there's
a big
nothing as
criticism,
tedious.
you know, of fantasy books, because again, it is a completely different world that you're not familiar with, you know, and a lot of fantasy books nowadays would have a glossary. And the fact, you know, that she didn't even need to really have that, you know, and it wasn't, you know, there wasn't that many definitions that you do need to know. There were enough that you felt immersed in the world, but not so much that you were put off and intimidated either, you know.
Because, you know, I read anything from the back of a cereal box, you know, to, you know, any genre, any style, you know, I'll give it a go. You know, I'm not snobby or snottery when it comes to that. So, and I certainly found that something that recommended, you know, her skill as an author and a modern author, you know, every word was necessary. And even there you had mentioned, you know, the concepts that she had introduced, you know, there were some, even in how vampires were created, you know, either by the goddess was it
Nyaxia, she's like their mother sort of thing.
And then some of them were created. And even within that, you know, so there was a level of complexity within that in terms
and
of
even,
that
you know,
dynamic.
like, I feel like as well, just talking about the difference between the ones that were made, you know, by Nyaxia versus the ones that were created by other vampires, I kind of feel like that also translates into the modern day, you know, with sort of the prejudices, because Rain is a created vampire, you know, and the prejudices that he suffers, you know, throughout the novel because he wasn't
Bloodborne.
Because he wasn't like a true child of Nyaxia, he was like created against as well. And even like the internal struggles that they have themselves with that, you know, being a human and living a normal human life, normal human relationships, and then becoming this vampire and having to realize, you know, the people that I love, they're long gone. You know, things like that. And even like as the series goes on and we get to know a wee bit more, I don't want to spoil anything, but the struggles that, you know, characters that we've already met have with leaving their old life behind, and the guilt that they feel for something that wasn't necessarily their fault, you know, as well. So
I suppose that kind of takes us right across the spectrum of kind of human experience as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And because it's a fantasy novel, you're able to kind of interrogate that and explore that in a way that you can kind of work your way through it, that gives you maybe a greater understanding of the process in, you know, real life. In that regard. So no, I found that very, very memorable. The plot as well. That's what I mean about the complexity of the novel.
Tightly woven,
it was so tightly written from the beginning right through to the end. Now, I have to say that in terms of the dynamic between Vincent,
he's my favorite. Do you know, I wouldn't have given him a second thought. I never liked him, but now he is my favorite character.
I think that, you know, the fact that he has been given such a human name, but yet he has been elevated to the most powerful fantasy character. When you marry that with the complexity of the relationships and the characters.
And do you know what? Even just in terms of his characterization, I feel like you nearly felt like Araya, you know, like, I love him, but, do you know that way? Like, you love him in despite or in spite of everything, and then finding out, you know, sort of what he did to get his crown. And you know, when Araya, she just can't comprehend, you know, this is the man that I've looked up to all these years, you know, in that struggle. I thought that was very...
It's nearly, it takes that sense of that unconditional love where you begin to realise, you know, even yourself, and now I know this is you're going to find this really, really hard to cope with, you know, that your parents aren't perfect. You know, they're not. They are human beings. They make mistakes, and sometimes,
Don't
you know...
say that.
Sometimes they have a ruthless ambition, but that doesn't mean that you don't like them, that you don't love them.
I have to spend the rest of my life trying to work out your Ruthless Ambition.
I don't look practically perfect and
Vincent.
I'm the Mary Poppins of
Vincessa.
parents.
I was trying to think of a female name for you, but
Sheila.
Sheila.
And just on a side note, I would be the world's worst vampire in the world.
you couldn't
You know,
cope.
I just couldn't
starve.
cope. I would, because I just go, even when they talk about those kind of scenes, with the goblets overflowing, I'm like, skip that, because, I
What parts of this book did you read?
well, to be fair, there wasn't really that much goriness
Just
in
hearing
it.
about the bits that you skipped.
There were two things that I did struggle with aside from that.
Yeah.
So obviously one of them was the sex element, and that, because I think it was just too much.
Okay.
A little would have been,
Little goes a long way.
yes, it would have gone a long way for me. But
Do
in
you
saying
know
that, it wasn't a big deal.
you would have your eyes open, because I have had to DNF books, because that's just
What does DNF mean?
Oh, we need a glossary for you now.
okay, yeah.
Do not finish. For the same reason.
Because of that reason.
Oh, I absolutely.
Okay, well, so the second thing, and I've just had a glass of Prosecco, and I hope I can finish the second thing that I found hard. I suppose that became a little problematic for me. I think that I was a little, and I know that you weren't, that we have very different opinions on how we read.
the ending.
So the ending, and also the revelation of kind of the connection between Oriah and Vincent.
Yeah.
So I do think.
Do you know that now? I feel like for me, I pieced together the connection between Oriah and Vincent pretty quickly throughout, just from the wee clues. The thing that got me was I'm assuming.
No, you're not going to give any spoilers.
It was that sort of heartbreak, and I was like, oh my God, did that just happen? And then, do you know the way they get a wish from Nyaxia, a reward for winning the Kajari? When that was reversed, my head was going into overdrive, like, what if this happens? What if this happens? And then it was all okay, and then, well, it wasn't, it's not all okay. And then that's where this book comes in, because then you've got that struggle then, that there sort of tension, that that anger and resentment building up as well, which again, I love a wee bit of resentment.
You see, I think that having got to that stage, and with the premise being that in terms of the plot, enter the Kajari, they have these 4 trials.
I love trials.
Yeah, the trials I thought were so clever.
Yes.
So well written, so good. They were absolutely brilliant. And I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
The darkness, that's what I was going to say, that I struggled with. Just popped back into my head when I thought about it. I did struggle with that, but as the complexity of the world and the characters
I feel
continued.
like, do you know what it reminds me of? And this is going to be a very stupid analogy.
There's no such thing.
No, this is, you're going to go, what is she talking about?
No judgment here.
How I pictured it was sort of like Batman the animated series. See,
there is seriously judgment here.
But it's dark. And do you know how they conveyed that darkness? This is a kids animated show, by the way. They didn't, draw it on white paper. They drew the pictures and all on black paper.
Yeah.
And that's how I imagined this. I just pictured it as, it's not Twilight, but I don't know. I just pictured it as that, but on dark paper.
Yeah, okay.
Does that make sense?
That's okay.
My mind is a complex place.
Insight into your mind. Which brings us on nicely, I suppose, to kind of the final aspect that we're going to talk about in terms of this, because I'm very mindful that we want people to read this, we want people to enjoy it, and we want to we don't want to spoil too much.
Yeah.
But within the kind of complexity of the fantasy genre, the characters, the plot, the relationships, there's an awful lot of, and this is where I kind of love to question my own enjoyment of this style of novel. Moral ambiguity within the within character. Yeah. So just to kind of hear your stance on that, and then I'll feed in, because I know that
Well,
even though we're mother and daughter, and even though you have, in terms of nature versus
Yes.
nurture,
We're different people.
I did my best. You're very different. And I like that, because, it gives that kind of balanced perspective.
Yes.
So I'm going to throw it over to you.
Are you saying I'm the morally black and you're morally white?
I leave that up
Right, okay.
to everybody else to judge.
I like moral ambiguity only because I feel like that is more realistic to human nature in general. Look, you said it yourself, you're not perfect. Do you know what I mean?
Doesn't mean that I am
No, but
bad.
Look, I feel like everybody again has their own motivations, and
yes, okay. I'll try, and I see I'm going full mommy here now. I am. Yeah.
There's some things that, look at the world today, you would think that's bad. You know, they're like murder.
Yes.
Bad.
Yes.
We can all agree it's bad. But killing someone in self-defense, or no, I'm not going to say my other thing.
Okay.
But killing someone and say you did that, it's not good, but it's not bad either. Do you know what I mean? It's in that sort of
There's
middle area.
Two very different things there, I would say. That's not...
No, okay, but I can't say the other thing that I'm going to say because it's not...
It would trigger me.
No, it wouldn't trigger you. It just wouldn't be good. I feel like...
That means it would trigger me.
There's good and bad in all of us.
Yes, absolutely.
And sometimes we do the wrong thing because we think it's right.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
and
I
I
agree.
feel like...
Yes.
Like... If there's... So, for example...
It's subjective.
It is.
Yes.
Well, what happens at the end of the novel, what Rain does in the most vague terms, you may say is very, very bold, but he did it for what he considered the right reasons.
Okay, so...
And I feel like that's...
The end justifies the means. Is that it?
Well... Yeah.
In terms of this text, you see,
and I feel like that. No, I do feel like humans we do think like that. Like we will do something bad if we feel like it's going to get us the good result or do the best thing for people.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to flip that over, and I'm going to say that generally, if that's a generalization, I would say that absolutely 100%. But you do always know that there is an exception to the rule, and that I am the embodiment of the exception to the rule. I also
am biased because I like a baddie.
No, everybody likes a baddie. Everybody likes a baddie. That doesn't mean to say that in term that that's human nature as well, is to be to be drawn to that type of thing. So it would be disingenuous to say otherwise. Yeah. But in terms of the moral ambiguity, so you have Vincent, okay?
And at his heart, what do you think he is?
He is the most, I think, morally conflicted character within the text. I don't even think that Rain or Oriah or... like you have the likes of Sentinus, who is he's just black. There's no grey there at all. And still there's something compelling about him. You're both drawn. But that's the whole concept of a vampire. You're repelled and you're drawn to them.
It's like that, like in Vampire Diaries, the compulsion.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah. But, so I think you have to be mindful of that. But I would say the most morally, in terms of the moral ambiguity, that Vincent... who is, and I suppose that dichotomy of character is kind of, the more I think about his name within the context of his position.
You did a lot of thinking of it.
Do you know what I mean?
You had like a mind map and you put Vincent in the middle and you were like, here's an idea.
But that's,
you just couldn't get over his name.
It's because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit.
And do you know what? If you were to actually talk to the authors,
she probably
like,
didn't.
It's just Vincent.
Yeah, and that is it. I know that I'm taking this way beyond the author Broadbent's intention, but it just doesn't fit. Yeah. There's a conflict there with who he is, what he is, his motivation, his role within the text, his role within the world, and his very ordinary, nondescript 9 to 5 go to work, come home, 2.4 children, wee wife, all those
Yeah.
things, Vincent.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
There is such a conflict there. And I think that symbolically, and this is where I'm going, like, I'm taking this way, way
Vincent,
beyond
would you know what? I think you need a whole podcast just called Vincent.
And I do, like, for me, he is the character that I am just like, oh my goodness, you know,
He
even
just got your eye from that
even
first
that,
page he was
do you know
introduced.
the dance that they had? That for me,
Yes, that was
that
very
was
sweet,
one.
yeah.
That was the pivotal moment within the text for me.
Yeah.
It was the most memorable. It was the moment
Do you know
that
their
I could,
relationship was probably
the most compelling.
but even the most worthwhile for me, you know, like, I don't know, because I feel like, as you say, you do always expect your parents to be perfect, and then not their realization when you're like, not, he's not human, but like, they are going to make mistakes.
They're flawed.
And they do what they think is best for you,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it's their first time doing all this too, and I feel, look, you've given me a new sympathy for
You see,
Vincent. I
you
didn't
see.
think that we would be having this
Yeah,
conversation.
but there you go. That's what it's all about. And I think that that's possibly because if we talk about it anymore, we're going to kind of give too much away
Yeah.
about it. Now, I haven't read the series, and I'd just be very careful about what you say.
Oh, no,
because
don't
of
spoil
anybody.
it.
But would you recommend? So if you could even just
Right.
explain for
So
us,
this
Christina.
one, great. I love the structure. I love whenever books are structured with,
Completely
do you know,
agree.
like the Kajari, even the Hunger Games, a trial of some
Yeah.
sort that the character has to go through. This one, because it didn't have that.
What's the title of this one?
The Ashes and the Starcursed King.
Okay.
Because it didn't have that same structure. Now, there was a plot, and it was a strong plot, but I love this one so much, and the way it was structured that...
But it's really hard, I think, when
Well,
a
she
novel
couldn't do
is
another trial.
You can't, and you're better to take it in a different direction rather than try to expect the
Yeah.
same thing again, because that would have just come off as being
Yes.
pathetic. So
So I get
It's
that,
different.
but it's different. It's not as good, but it all wraps up and ties well, and it leaves room.
Are you being a little bit harsh given just how tightly
Yes,
written
I
this
am.
was?
I know that because
Did you enjoy this?
I did. I flew
Was
through
it
it.
equally as compelling?
Absolutely, yes.
And were you hooked from the first word until
Oh
the
yes.
last?
When I say there's resentment,
Okay.
chef's kiss. It was brilliant. This one,
Vampire chef's kiss. That's a little tasteless.
this one has
Right,
my
what
heart.
is this? So this is Six Scorched Roses. Now, is this a novella?
This is a novella, a wee shorty. It's
And
lovely.
So explain the concept of this one then.
So it's a kind of
So
like a
this-
spin-off.
This one functions as a duet.
Duet. This is a prequel to how one of the vampires in this book,
Okay.
so we haven't been introduced to them
Okay.
yet, but how they met their human wife.
Okay.
But the wife has been turned, okay? And which was very unheard
Okay,
of.
okay.
They came under a lot of scrutiny,
Yeah.
and it's how that sort of developed, and it's structured through these 6 roses. He has to bring her 6, or she
okay.
has to bring him 6 roses.
Now, whenever you were, so I haven't read these yet, and I fully intend to, just for fun, just for giggles, because I thoroughly enjoyed this. So you explained to me that when this one was released originally in the UK and in
so
Ireland.
in the US, it was released first.
Yes. So when
Yeah.
you read this, obviously
I read it after
we're
this.
we're in Ireland,
Yeah.
so you read this one, and this one.
And that's my recommended reading order.
Okay, so when it was released in the US, this one was the first.
Yeah.
Then this one came, followed by this one.
Yes.
And you think the recommended reading order is to read
I feel
the
like
duet
yeah,
as a
just read them
as a total,
yeah.
and then this functions as a standalone.
So this one's completely optional, and the author would say this, but
Could you read this one on its own without having read?
Yeah.
Okay.
you could, because the characters that you meet in this one you haven't met until this one.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
I feel like if you read this, then this, it would take you out of the
This
story
word,
really, because you're like,
okay,
who is this?
Yeah. Okay.
It gave a wee bit more depth to those characters who you didn't really see that often in this. Loved it. loved it. It's my favourite.
She definitely has sold me on it. So
I
that's
love
going to
it.
keep me busy for the next few weeks. And then finally, this is The Songbird and the Heart of Stone. So talk to me, talk to us about where this fits with this the rest of the series.
This also has my heart. I love it. Again, whenever I talk about the structure, that's what this one lacks for me. This one, without giving too much away, follows a character that we've met in this one. It's a spin-off. It's a completely...
So again, this is one that you could read as a standalone and then come back to this.
You could, but I personally wouldn't, because you need to get to know the character. There's wee clues about this character in these two. You know, and it's in this one that this character...
And I know the character in question.
I did tell you.
I have a huge soft spot for that character as well.
But I feel like you would like that character.
Can we name the character?
It's Misha.
And Misha has a lot of very redeeming qualities.
She does, and she struggles with... Because she's turned...
condition.
She struggles, and she feels like she should bear the brunt of this guilt, you know. Yeah. She's been betrayed by her god that she... followed when she was a human.
Was heartbreaking.
Don't, because it gets worse.
Okay. But anyway, you see what I mean about spoilers, so we're going to try and keep it. So this again, recommended reading order. Read these two as a unit. Yeah. And then we have our standalone Six Scorched Roses, the novella. And then we have The Songbird and the Heart of Stone. Well, listen, cheers, my dear.
I think my glass is practically empty.
And that's not a metaphor for how you're feeling at the minute.
Definitely not.
We can top you up. So listen, thank you. Until the next time, from Prosecco and Plot Twists. Cheers.